So your background is in gaming, Zynga, Take-Two, Kabam, where like LTV modeling, cohort analysis, and payback period thinking have been kind of operational requirements for a decade. And now with B2B SaaS companies where many of these practices are still kind of aspirational, what are operational disciplines from gaming that when you bring them into a SaaS company produce the fastest kind of like change or aha moment? What do SaaS growth teams consistently not measure that gaming teams would consider insane to operate without?
Yeah, I think part of it is taking a step back and actually looking at like SaaS and D2C or sort of gaming marketing or UA as like similar. There's like a decent overlap on that sort of Venn diagram, but there actually are some significant differences. And also then if you look at the origins of them, right, where SaaS has been around forever, and then gaming kind of came about when mobile took off and we had the IDFA, the ability to kind of hyper target very specific users on phones that really shaped and kind of developed how mobile games were pushed from a marketing perspective. So the fact that like gaming kind of started with its like hyper granular, like we can actually build lists of very specific individuals, and that's essentially what developed into mobile gaming. SaaS kind of developed in its own web world and very much in a different attribution world, right? Mobile had that ability to kind of specifically target those specific IDFAs using an attribution platforms or MMPs. And then we have SaaS that's now kind of like in the middle of this sort of renaissance of like, well, why aren't we actually looking at attribution at sort of the similar way? And I think that's essentially like part of the reason that people like me and Matt Widows and Dan Bars have been able to easily like swap over to the SaaS side and have immediate impact, not have to learn this sort of a whole new world, right? Is we're actually bringing some of the aspects that really, really worked with mobile gaming and bringing those to SaaS in a way that is very effective. That first one will be attribution, right? You'd be surprised the number of companies, even billion-dollar companies, that just don't know the full like funnel of their onboarding to a potential customer. From the very first touch, they look at the ad platform and then they just kind of say, came out the other end and we got 12% of people, or like 12% of interest, right? like it's like that's not how this kind of works. Like you should be able to tell me every step of the way, and every time someone clicked on an ad of yours or interacted with some content or some thought leadership stuff, or anytime anybody came into any of your ecosystems or interact with anything that you have out there from a paid marketing perspective, should be tracked and be able to kind of tell you the full life cycle. And I think that's step one. Related to that is step two, is that when you look at like what's your CAC, and they're like, I don't know, I just looked at the first number and I divided it by the last number. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's true. That is a very rudimentary way of doing that. But like, you haven't broken it up by ICP, you haven't broken it up by like campaign or platform, right? There's like a whole bunch of stuff that kind of goes on there where they like to look at like a lump number, where we like to look at it from, especially in the gaming side of things, where we looked at it from like a very, very granular perspective by, you know, at the most basic level of like the splitting between iOS and Android. But then, you know, as we kind of got into it, it's like, well, what are our whales? And we should be bidding more on those, right? So we need other campaigns that are kind of out there prospecting, looking for other people to come in and enjoy this game. And those will be a different bid. We're kind of bringing some of that mentality to SaaS, and like a lot of SaaS companies are kind of catching up on that front too. They begin to need to look at this at a very granular level, because a dollar spent on one platform isn't a dollar's worth of marketing necessarily. Not all of them are built equally.
And just to clarify, because I'm not sure how ingrained this term is yet in the B2B SaaS world, wells, you're meaning like really, really high paying, high value customers, right?
Yeah, so in mobile gaming, the vast majority of the budget, the sort of revenue generated comes from a minority of the users, right? Usually like, 15-20% of users are going to be 80+% of your revenue. For the most part, like there's some varying depending on the genre in the game, that kind of stuff. It's a little different from SaaS, whereas in mobile gaming, can be anywhere from like you just did a beginner offer and we never saw you again, it's probably about $5, $4.99, or maybe a little bit lower, to people who are spending upwards of 6-7 figures a year on these mobile games.
MAVAN works a lot with companies transitioning from founder-led go-to-market to like a real growth system. What does this transition actually look like when it goes well? Walk us through like an example where you helped a company make this shift. What was the founder doing before? What system replaced it, and how long did it take before that was producing results?
Like founders at very beginning, very, very early startups, it's about emotion. You're like leading, everyone's got an idea and they're kind of committing to it. And to a degree, if you're in a disrupted industry that hasn't done this before, like you have to believe that fully and all out, because there's no data point to look at, right? You're building something to address something or disrupt something you believe truly is going to do it. Now you're at the point where either you've raised a significant round, or you've got to the point where your product's live and it's seeing traction, that you actually have to then begin growing this company as if it's an actual thing, like not an idea anymore that isn't isn't out there. It's out there. People are engaging with it. It's a growing idea. People like it. They want more. Okay, so how are you going to go about getting that to them and actually treating it as a mature product now? So, now you've kind of got that moment, like you're off to college. How are you going to do it? There's a moment where you're essentially having to make your first big hire. And there's that moment of like, who's going to lead this? And I think a decent number of founders make the mistake, and this is funny because I'm one of these people, but like they hire a sort of growth exec or a growth leader to come in and do it. And that's a very limited number of people. There aren't many people like me who are both willing to do the strategy and all the execution and do the board meetings and do all the other stuff you kind of need to do in the startup world. We tend to like, either you do all of the execution and that's kind of your world, or you're in the strategy thing and you want to manage a team. And with startups, like there's no budget to hire you a full team. So that's why I should think that people should find out exactly what's working, right? So if you've got some founder-led stuff and they're running some Facebook campaigns and Google and that kind of stuff, and they're doing whatever those platforms say you're supposed to do, because they all have these like bright red notifications, like make sure you're checked all the boxes, right? Which is really good at spending budget and not necessarily so great at finding the exact people you want. And so you need to hire somebody that can actually answer those questions for you. Right? Finding a very good one, and they aren't necessarily super cheap either, is harder to do than you think it will be. And also takes an element of risk. And that's part of the reason why I think it's a dangerous choice, right? Like you have to make this choice. You have to pivot to, this maturing curve to actually get some additional revenue to kind of grow the business as a whole. But it's going to take some risk on both that pivot and on who you're going to hire.
You see B2B SaaS companies' attribution stacks at their worst. That's the moment MAVAN gets brought in to audit them. What is the most common attribution failure you encounter, and what does it actually cost the company in terms of misallocated spend or invisible CAC inflation? Walk us through like a specific build, what was broken, what you changed, and what the team could suddenly see that they couldn't before.
Most common failure, I think there's two. Attribution essentially is like last touch, and they look at the amount spent and they look at what came in, and it's a workable system in theory. At smaller scale, I wouldn't say it's particularly workable at large scale, but that's how we all started and how this industry began. But it's not really allowing you to mature or treat your product, or if you have multiple product offerings, right? There's a whole lot of issues with that sort of base thing. And so, usually we kind of come in and basically kind of point that out and then actually treat these things like as individual business units within the business itself, and kind of the different audiences and all that stuff as well. So there's that one. The other one we'll call the Frankenstein approach, right? Where as companies grow, and especially founder-led ones, you just kind of build stuff as you need it. Engineering resources are scarce, like, resources in general are scarce. And so you're going to only build the stuff that you really need and when you need it. There is no like, we've got this 6-year roadmap and we're going to build this and we've got an engineering team of 40. If you're at that point, amazing, but you're definitely not a startup, right? Really, in my mind at that point, or at least not one that's struggling and founder-led at that point. So this is one of those things where like, as you mature and you've got to make that pivot moment to kind of bring on some of this growth, or to really hit that mature step where you want to grow this company, you have this problem that like the Frankenstein pieces don't necessarily all work together. You might have a creature now that has like 5 arms and no legs, right? Where you're like, well, we've built a thing and it worked, but now we actually have to kind of take a step back and figure out how to make an efficient growth machine that is scalable to the point we want. You go out there and you raise like 8 figures, 9 figures, which, how large expectation of that is goes towards marketing. Yeah, you're going to run into some real problems really quickly with a Frankenstein together system. And so there needs to be that moment of like, well, we've raised the money, but before we can deploy it effectively and in a way that we are sure that we're going to get it and grow this revenue stack and have all these kind of answers that we want to be able to get from having this increased budget and a more mature marketing org, you have to kind of go back and fix a lot of those issues. And that could be anything from adding attribution, multi-touch attribution across the board. We have everything from like some funnels are on first touch, some are on last touch, right? Like there's a whole lot of different things that can be factored into that Frankenstein model, and they won't all be consistent. They won't all be the same for any company. So we have to kind of come in and figure out those out and then offer a solution.
Most SaaS companies track MQLs and demo bookings. So boards want to see like CAC payback and net new ARR. How do you actually bridge those two worlds? What does the conversion tracking need to look like? And what specific integrations or operational changes does a typical company need to make to get from we report on leads to we can tell you the CAC payback period by channel and segment?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to attribution and the depth of it. At some point, people kind of look at the beginning, the middle, and the end, and that's it. And the honest part is at the top of that funnel between the first, like they've just been introduced to the brand for the very first time, or first seen an ad for the first time, to that sort of like MQL stage has a whole bunch of steps in it. And those are varying different timelines for each different segment and different audience, for different industries, different products, right? There's like a whole lot of variables that go into that top element. You need to be able to track and actually know what's going on. Like, how are you telling the story of your product or your company if you don't know in what order they're seeing the images or the story that you're telling, or if they're just seeing things kind of haphazardly blown out there into the various platforms? If you're on LinkedIn, for example, or if you're on Instagram Reels, those are probably two very different experiences for a different person, right? Like Reels is probably not something they're doing at work on their computer, but LinkedIn might be, because like one's socially acceptable to do, whereas the other isn't. And you know, you kind of have to tailor those experiences, but those are different touches towards you being able to lead and tell them a story about your product. And that's one of those things that, like, you know, a lot of companies just don't necessarily have a full vision on that. I found a lot of companies necessarily don't know what order or what ads they even really saw by the time someone converted, right? We saw them, this is the first one that got them. This is a lead that came in and we got the info, like email and all that stuff. And then this is the one when we closed it and it was revenue. And those are decent standpoints, like the minimum data points, I would say. But the ones that actually then end up going and actually knowing what happens in all of that are the ones that actually look at that top and mid funnel steps to get from one to the other. There'll be an element of like, you interact with our ad, so that'll be a click to page view on one of our landing pages. But the next interaction might be that they just like bailed. And so then the next one might also be a click and then a landing page view and then another click and a landing page view. But you're able to look at those in order. You can actually see like, oh, they're interested about cost. And then, you know, they bailed, but maybe we didn't have enough information about costs on there, or now we can lower them. Or maybe that was just like, they're not in the right moment to make that decision. Like some of these SaaS products they're not cheap, right? Like the LTVs on these things are much, much higher than like gaming, or in the bids for it are much higher in terms of getting folks to an actual converted contract. You have to hit them exactly at the right time that they were going to make a decision about maybe making a large software decision for an entire company. And it's just, that's a very small segment for a very small number of people who can single-handedly make that decision, right? Most people kind of go to work, they have to kind of tell it to their bosses, there's a committee, there's a bunch of like competitor research, they do these pitches, they have a meeting. If you're in a corporate world, this is probably like a 5 to 9 month decision. So that's one of those things where like, yeah, okay, so you hit them at the right time in terms of educating them on the product. The decision and the minute to close on that deal might be months away, you know? And so you have to be able to know how you told that story and be able to then link it back once that actual like contract closes.
Marketing budgets have dropped to around 7.7% of revenue. Every SaaS marketing leader is being asked to do more with less. When you come into a company and audit their spend, where do you most commonly find waste that they didn't know existed? What's the quick diagnostic someone can run on their own to find the biggest budget leak?
If you're really all in on search and search really effective for you, you're going to keep pushing the search button, right? Like, and give me more deals, right? Like, which is understandable, but there's also an element at some point, the friction of that, or you're kind of forcing that channel and you're trying to find the lesser known keywords or whatever, right? Because you're not competitive on all the ones you can kind of see. You know, at some point it's an arms race between you and a competitor if you're in SaaS. And so now you're kind of looking at like, well, how else do I find out things within this search bucket to like get ahead? And it just turns out that's incredibly hard to do, like, and at least effectively. And so some of the things we end up suggesting are, you should just cut some of this stuff on here. Like, you know, hey, this is like completely wasted spend in terms of like expansion on this specific channel. And there's a bunch of other stuff you can try. The interesting thing about SaaS in the B2B world is it's begun expanding way beyond the normal means, right? It used to be search, you know, Google and Bing. Then it was basically LinkedIn. That was kind of it. Now we're seeing that's kind of expanding heavily into like paid social. Instagram and Facebook, even TikTok are now kind of having like B2B style ads that are kind of working and targeting very specific individuals on those platforms. So now it's, you know, it's that element of like, well, if there's a way for you to expand and you're not doing it, and it's a massive scale network like Meta or like TikTok, like you probably should try something there rather than trying to find the next like 20 keywords that your competitor totally hasn't thought about, because they probably have. And you're now going to get into a bidding war and an arms race on even more keywords that are just going to eat up budget to a degree, right? You don't even necessarily know if that's working for your competitor or whether you're now just kind of like, we're getting as many keywords as we possibly can, right? And we're looking at that amount spent and we're looking at what comes in and we hope that it's profitable. The ROAS is in the right direction.
Everyone talks about PLG in 2026, but your experience is that forcing one go-to-market motion across all segments is one of the most expensive mistakes in SaaS. Can you walk us through how you actually structure PLG for SMB, Sales Assist for mid-market, ABM for enterprise within a single company? And what signals have you found that actually predict conversion versus signals that look promising but don't convert?
So like PLG for SMB, I think is essentially because SMBs are a short conversion time, right? You're a small business, the decision holder is usually one or two people, maybe tops, right? And it's much smaller budget, so there's like less scrutinizing and all this other kind of worry on the SMB side of things. And so you just kind of optimize your product towards converting that and offering what they need in the short term. ABM, that's going to take a long time. Like you got to nurture it. You got to find the right messaging. You got to then get that messaging out there, filter it through, and it has to be absorbed by multiple touches on various ads and various platforms, right? That's kind of how that all works. And you're targeting very specific people with it, but it's going to take a while for you to actually get those folks hooked unless you have something that's absolutely like pure gold, right? And so you have time to figure out this PLG thing, which what the SMBs need is also what enterprise is going to need to a degree, right? But you have time to kind of gather that from your SMBs and then begin building this sort of additional layers of enterprise stuff on top of it. Your sales assist for mid-market. That's similar to that, right? Where like you're having to, I would almost put it in the same bucket as the ABM stuff, but like ABM to a degree is going to eventually lead to helping your sales team. You just kind of remove some of the larger steps because of that corporate timeline. Like it's not going to take a year for a mid-market company to like make that decision. It might take months, but it's not going to take as long as it will, where you're going to have to go through all this stuff, legal, it's going to take months. Very large corporations move pretty slowly because they can, but it does mean that you have to be in that funnel to begin with and then making your way through it as quickly as you can, but it's still going to take like a long time. So your sales team will eventually get somebody, but it might be one of these things where they're going to have to kind of like do some stuff on their side too to kind of nurture that along. Whereas the mid-market stuff, much easier to close. They've got stuff to work on in the meantime. And to a degree, like those are kind of the two paths, I think. PLG and then sales is essentially B2B.
MAVAN's audit work has found that many B2B SaaS companies use fear-based or uncertainty-focused messaging when they should be leading with aspirational and talent accessibility.
You need a little bit of both, but I think in general what resonates more with people is not being told that they're behind or that they're bad, right? But I do think the aspirational aspect, telling people like, you're doing great, but you could be doing like 5x, great, more great, right? Like that's why LLMs are all just like, great job, good ideas. If Claude told you had really bad ideas, you wouldn't use it. So there should be some element of that too, right? Taking from that you're being told constantly that you need to do better. And by the way, you can do better by giving us a bunch of money. It's like a hard sell. Hey, you're doing great. We can actually do like a lot better and you can get you to your revenue goals. It's a much easier sell.
MAVAN has also found that like feature heavy messaging doesn't necessarily ladder up to outcomes.
I think a lot of companies, especially when you're in that ecosystem, like it's really hard to determine like what's the best thing we're doing. We do like 20 different things. That's great, amazing. What's the best one you do? And they're like, well, it's these 5. It's like, well, I asked what was the best one. There's kind of filters into the ads to a degree where they don't necessarily know what their target audience would deem to be like the best thing. And so therefore they want to list everything in the ads. So they'll list those 5 things, or worse, they'll list the 20 things they do, in which case you've basically caused options paralysis or overwhelming your target audience with very limited ad space. Most platforms these days, you've got 3 seconds to hook somebody. If you put those 20 products in those 3 seconds, they don't know anything about any of them. They just saw a bunch of blurs. The other side of that is that they've put everything in there because they don't know who the target audience is. So they're like, we'll figure it out. Tell them all about us. Like, tell us everything about us. And then we'll figure out who figured it out. It means you're just spending a ton of money out there just to get a few people to click on it and tell you something, when there's probably a much more scientific, like systematic approach you could have taken to that, right? Do some basic thinking about this product. What are the 4 ICPs that you might want to have it and prioritize them? What are the specific messages you think that would resonate or we have seen resonate with people in that industry or other products, right? How are people going about that industry and those specific audiences and marketing to them? And then try it, get out there and focus on 1 specific or 2 specific messages and specific product features around it. 3 tops, like don't get too crazy with it. That should resonate with the audiences you're targeting.
You've talked about building an experimentation framework as a core part of MAVAN's 90-day sprint. Most SaaS companies say they A/B test, but few have a real system. What does a functioning experimentation program look like in a B2B SaaS context, where sample sizes are small, sales cycles are long, and you can't just split test a mobile app? What's the minimum viable experimentation setup you'd recommend, and how do you handle the statistical significance when you only have a few hundred visitors per variant?
One of the things that I think people should continue to borrow from mobile is this sort of product experimentation A/B stuff, right? Where if you go into most mobile games or pretty much any mobile product that's like of any significant size, there is going to be an A/B test going on at any given moment. They're just constantly testing and constantly iterating. And there is an element of that with SaaS, but like not to the same degree where you're changing like significant aspects of it, from full look at the dashboards to like, any kind of look or feel, or brand testing or that kind of stuff as well. They tend to be a little bit more on the like, we've got this thing, so we need to see if, does pricing move the needle at all a little bit. It's like, well, probably like the last venue you want to actually be testing on. But there's just a lot there to be kind of picked up. So for the paid media side, that to me is definitely where ICP tends to be like the biggest compass that a lot of these companies use in order to determine where they're going to put their ad and who they're targeting and all that, and how they connect it to the product. And so that was one of the ones where you're going to have to like really get into creative. You're really going to get into like landing page and conversion optimization. You have to like do a lot of testing on that front. And all of those lend themselves to A/B testing, right? If you don't have a creative testing framework as part of your spend at any level, especially at the early levels, but like any level, like a percentage of your budget should be going to just testing on any given month. And if that sounds crazy, your competitors are already ahead of you, right? Like they're definitely doing this. And in an era where like quantity of creative is one of the biggest things, like you need to know what you're making rather than just spewing random stuff out there and hoping it works. Like there should be a systematic scientific process to, these are the 3 ICPs we're targeting, 3 variants, 3 hooks, right? Like we're going to go through and we're going to test all of that, and we'll make sure that at least a significant percentage of these are heading in the right direction. And that doesn't mean you have to take months or years to like figure that out. Like it's one of those things where within 2 weeks you should probably know if you set this up right, or less. Like, obviously smaller sample pools, and like, you kind of have to let it filter through. So you need a process too in order to kind of keep tracking these as time goes on. From a paid marketing perspective, where like that lead or MQL might not even register for a month or two, then the contract has to close. And if it's a huge contract, like one of those corporate ones, you're looking at 9 months later, like we got the green light. But that's kind of how, that's the scientific systematic part, right? Like this is science experiment A, we're doing it this period of time, we're expecting these folks to come in, and we're going to track it all the way along. And the people who are first touch here, we're going to not take all the credit, but this will be part of looking at that journey that person took from first touch all the way through to close contract. So that's part one. I think the landing pages is another thing, right? That's really about communicating on and kind of making good on the ad that you had, right? And ads they send a message, they are telling you about the product. You're definitely kind of setting expectations that when they click through, that expectation should be continued. It should be like the next part of the story you already started beginning to tell. And then if they're not closing there, or they're not submitting their info, find out why. There should be user interviews, or you should be talking to your audience and that kind of stuff as well, right? There's definitely a multitude of ways you can gather feedback, both through sort of like impersonal ways with just basic surveys to, like do user sessions, like literally just grab people off the street. Check this out. Sounds nuts, but like that's one of those things where like I've done it before when we were in San Francisco, like grabbing people off the street, obviously a little bit more tech focused being an SF, but like, just grabbing people off the street and asking like what they thought of like a mobile game. You get instant feedback. Is it useful? Well, it depends on the feedback they give you, right? But like, at least it's a step in the right direction. If you're not doing any of that, then like you're not really getting any feedback on what you're doing.
When MAVAN embeds a new B2B SaaS client, what happens in the first 30 days? Walk us through the actual diagnostic process, the 360-degree analysis, the specific audits you run, whether that's like attribution, UA, product, conversion, UX, and how you prioritize what you fix first.
All of MAVAN have been an internal team. This is the first time we've ever really done anything that was kind of agency side. And that's the point of pride, I think, especially for me, like the fact that we can kind of come in and make a significant impact as being treated and sort of acting as an internal team is probably one of the biggest sells, both for me and also because that's the way we get to make a biggest impact. As part of that, we're not just a paid marketing agency. We're not just a CRM agency, right? We are not one specific silo. If anything, we sit on the top of that. Matt Witter, as our CEO, kind of has this like vision that growth isn't really one specific thing. It's a system essentially that sits above all of these individual silos that normally don't talk to each other. Product tends to do its own thing. Marketing does its own thing. Finance does its own thing. And they're all interacting, like, they're not all completely in vacuums. But for the most part, when it's, day starts, they don't go over and talk to marketing. They're like, time to get the product ship going. So we kind of come in and we have the advantage of being an outside org, but we also have the advantage of having all the internal knowledge of how a lot of that worked. I worked in product, I've worked in marketing, a lot of them, I've kind of bridged those gaps. I've worked closely with things like finance, where I got out of my way to more properly integrate myself with the silos within the company. That's been who me to kind of advance the paid marketing side of things. And so we kind of bring that knowledge in and then essentially look at how the company is conducting itself from a full 360 view, right? We're looking at paid marketing, we're looking at lifecycle and CRM, we're looking at what is the state of your data, what's the attribution system look like, but in general, what does the data look like from across the company? What's the data health look like? Are you using one consolidated data set for the whole company to make decisions, or does each one have their own sort of skew or view? This happens a lot where everyone has their own looker dash, and then when you actually begin to dig into it, it's like, well, your data is cut differently from the way they're looking at the data. And that's different from the way finance is looking at data. And this is very different from the way the execs are looking at the data. And so no one actually has the same image or picture of what's going on here. And so we kind of come in and just essentially write all of that stuff down. Like that is quite possibly one of the biggest things we end up actually delivering is a document that has all of it in detail. There is a concentrated version of that is then given to the execs, right? But attached to all of those are additional documents that kind of go into it and in depth by paid marketing, lifecycle, you name it, all the different groups that we touch. Just to give you an example of like how big that can get, we recently handed a doc to a client that was 84 pages long. That's a very long doc. I don't expect anyone to sit and read it all in one sitting, but the whole point is that has everything, right? This is your encyclopedia of your current state of the business. And, we got a lot of learnings out of it. And that's the other part is at the end of the 360, we give you a prioritized list of things that we believe are immediate to do, nice to do, right? We actually give you a full roadmap for the next 90 days at the end of that 30 days. And if you want us to do it, great. But we also design these things to be handed to the client that they can then go execute on themselves. Some of them go off and essentially say, thank you. Like we had no idea and we're going to go fix a bunch of this ourselves. The other part of that is that because it's prioritized, they might say, okay, now, top priority right now is fixing paid media and getting our data in line to be able to support that. So we're going to do data first and then we'll get paid media where it needs to be. And then you have life cycle in here, but we're just not ready to do that. We can definitely adjust what we're doing and kind of approach it from that perspective. We can adjust everything around that as well. So on the specific audits and how we go about it, we actually have a lot of subject matter experts. Last year, we paid over 150 different freelancers that, are part of our network. And they were all essentially the top 1% performers that we've known in our lifetime. They're the ones doing the actual analysis and the ones who are giving you the audit, right? So if it's UX, it's a person who's done UX for things like Apple. They've definitely got like a high-end view on the world of UX and they're an expert in it. If you're doing product, it's people who've done product at Zynga, the products at, you name it, Airbnb and that kind of thing. They're all experts in their field and they're able to provide you the top level knowledge on all that as well.
What's the single most common quick win you find in the first 2 weeks that produces a measurable improvement before the full strategy is even built?
Oh man, within the first 2 weeks. So I think there's two ways I would go about that. One is paid marketing. Like paid marketing is one of those ones where you can make a pretty easy call early on. Are you spending a ton of money and it's just shooting off into the ether and you're not getting anything for it? We can come in and pretty quickly make an impact there. And it may just be saying, don't spend the money yet, you're not ready, which is a pretty big impact, both on the incoming sales, right? Or potentially incoming sales, but if it's not working, there isn't that many coming in. You're good to save the money when you want to make a big decision or make a big move. The other part is a lot of like mid and larger sized corporate companies tend to have a lot of political battles that are like underlying at any time. We've been asked to come in, right? We're not kicking down the door, forcing an audit and then be like, we're leaving. We were asked to come in because there's a problem. And if we approach it from that perspective, we can essentially highlight where some of the biggest friction is between those orgs and how they're not working at all in lockstep as a company should. Hey, product has really never talked to paid marketing about why they're doing X, Y, and Z, or what they're learning from creative and what's really getting hooks to come into the product. And then they might come over angry, right? In which case things are already off on the wrong fit. And so, yeah, it's one of those things where like you just have to get these orgs to talk to each other. I think one of the biggest ones I've seen that was like such a discrepancy or just a disconnect was a finance team that had no idea what the cost of their acquiring a customer was. It's like, I saw the money going out, kind of see the money coming in, and like, those are not on the same time frame, especially for subscription apps where like you need time to build up to what you spent acquiring that person. And they just had no idea, right? There was no way of connecting any of it together, and they were just looking at bank accounts for the most part. But no one had ever even really approached the topic, right? They didn't have any idea at that time. And to be honest, part of the reason why they hired me was to come in and build that system. So I showed up to people who were like, whoa, there's like no knowledge being shared across these orgs. That's one of the things we just have to fix, right? We have to educate people on how this all works and then build systems that actually incorporate that education.